The Newsom Epiphany. That's right, the Newsom Epiphany. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Welcome, Christopher. And, of course, we do not have a dumbest bill in America or a go woke or go broke because we have so many great bills coming up that we want to save those and bring those out very soon. Trust me, all the state legislatures are meeting for the most part, as well as, of course, the national legislature in Congress. And naturally, the cities and counties as well. And we have some real doozies to bring to you very soon. So first up, the Newsom Epiphany. Newsom panics at recall and he opens the economy. So Gavin Newsom naturally wants to open the economy now that there's a possibility that he is going to be recalled. I actually think there's a really good chance he's going to be recalled. And so how does that work? And what is up with this recall? So Cal Matters is an online magazine that comes out that we subscribe to, and they talk about recalling a California governor explained. So I want to read this real quickly before we go into some clips from Newsom and others. Recall Gavin Newsom signs are popping up all around California at shopping centers, at street protests. People fed up with the Democratic governor are asking voters to sign petitions. What begins as a far-fetched effort by Republican activists has turned into a credible campaign attempting to throw Newsom out of office. It's hard to fathom in this deep blue state where Newsom clobbered his 2018 GOP opponent and, according to polls, remains popular with a strong majority of voters. But the coronavirus pandemic shifted California's political landscape into two significant ways. It prompted a judge to give recall supporters more time to collect signatures. Sounds familiar, like the elections last year, keeping their campaign alive long enough to gain momentum. And it led Newsom to enact a slew of new restrictions to curb the spread of the virus that have frustrated some Californians and energized recall backers. Here's the key part. The recall petition doesn't say a word about the pandemic. It was written before the virus even upended normal life. But it gained a surge of signatures after the news broke in November that a maskless Newsom joined lobbyists for dinner at the posh French Laundry restaurant, even though he was telling Californians to mask up and avoid socializing. And so the article goes on, but as you can imagine, the point is that ever since Newsom did exactly the opposite of what he told his Californian citizens to do, that's when the actual recall effort just took off. I mean, it's just crazy. So now my understanding is you need 1.5 million signatures, and they have 1.1 million signatures. So we have some lead-up clips on this. And first here's Newsom. He's asked the question in his most recent press conference about the recall effort and about the fact that he just lifted the lockdown and is opening up the economy. They ask him, hey, Governor, what about the lockdown and future governors and, what about the science of lockdowns? Talk about that, because apparently just like yesterday, the science was we need to lock down. But today, now that the recall effort apparently is really gaining steam and the people who are running it have until mid-March to get to 1.5 million signatures. They already have 1.1 million signatures and it's gaining momentum. Apparently you're opening up the economy. So talk about the science, please. We have that clip and here it is.
God forbid we go back to large rock concerts, et cetera, too early, or frankly, 5-6 months ago in the midst of this pandemic when we didn't necessarily have capacity and we didn't understand the complexities of potential variants moving in and didn't necessarily have adequate PPE or ICU capacity that we were holding large events with tens of thousands of people. Some folks, and it sounds like the folks that you exampled, support that. And respectfully, the doctors, the experts from Dr. Fauci on down, the overwhelming majority, I mean, it's like climate science. There's 2 or 3% that disagree, and you see them on certain networks, and then the rest of folks that acknowledge certain common sense as it relates to mitigation, the transmission of this pandemic.
Oh, yes. So good old Newsom, his desire and his decision, I should say, to open the economy from the lockdown that's been in place, it seems, forever in California. And he's opening it up because, of course, he's being recalled. His decision is science. It's about the science, because we have people that are denying the science, like climate change science, like climate science. I mean, can you believe this? And so why is he using climate science as an example of how he's using science and Dr. Fauci to keep the economy locked down, but suddenly has decided to open it because of the recall effort? Well, that's pretty simple. It's pretty simple because of the simple fact that for good old Gavin Newsom, he knows that his time in office is not much longer, but he has to divide the people of California by saying, you know, those Republicans, they deny climate science. So therefore, they're denying the science, I should say, of the lockdowns and of COVID. So that way, when Newsom is pretty much, look, Newsom is in full campaign mode now, right? He's in full campaign mode because he knows he could be recalled. So the best way to divide the state is to say those darn Republicans have never really believed the science of climate change. And they also don't believe the science of COVID. So therefore, you know, you shouldn't vote for them. You should vote for me. Well, herein lies the problem, podcast listeners, because with Gavin Newsom, his own people in his state, Democrats and independents alike, they're saying, open the darn economy, open it up. I mean, it's not just Republicans who are signing this recall effort. Obviously, you know, hundreds of thousands of Democrats and independents are signing it as well because they want the economy open because people are suffering by not being able to go out and live like human beings are supposed to live. So we also have Stuart Varney from Fox News. He's from the Fox Business Desk. And he asks, what about the data that is supposed to justify the lockdowns? And he asks a guest, and it's a great question because the central question of the Gavin Newsom recall campaign is, hey, yesterday you were closed down, today suddenly you're open. It was supposed to be a really long, dark winter. What happened with the recall effort? Is that the reason, or is it really science? So here's Stuart Varney, and we have a clip on that, and here it is.
The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, has lifted some restrictions in some parts of the state, but he's still refusing to release the state's COVID data that he used to justify the lockdowns. Tom Del Boccaro is with us this morning. Why won't he release the data?
Well, it depends on who you believe, and we don't know what we don't know about that data. But many believe it is because the data doesn't back up the lockdown. Remember, there was a Los Angeles Superior Court case where the judge says, show me the data on why outdoor dining adds to it. The state admitted it didn't have it. So with that kind of admission, we believe they don't have the data for the lockdown.
So they don't have the data, or they're hiding the data. Either way, that's really a bad look because you shut down one of the world's largest economies, the state of California, over the fact that you either don't have the data or you don't want to share the data. Either way, that's not a good look for a recall effort for Gavin Newsom to get at least reelected, and the recall could very well be successful. And so naturally, this is going to be at the center of the campaign, as Gavin Newsom says. You can see it, how he's dividing this. Well, it's because Republicans are against climate change. And they're like, well, we're not really running on this issue. We're running on the lockdowns. No, but you're against climate change and science. Okay, well, show us the science, Gavin Newsom. Well, I'm not going to show you that. I've been talking about it for 10 months to talk to you about that. Why should I show it to you? So here's Stuart Varney again. He says, well, how does the recall effort work in California? We somewhat explained that at the beginning of the segment, but you know what? It's better to hear it sometimes online because California is a unique place. And we have that explanation, and here it is on a clip.
Well, interestingly enough, the state is going to verify the signatures. Suddenly, California is going to care about whether the signatures were valid. We expect it. We're going to reach, I think our goal is 1.9 for cushion. And then we expect a statewide election in August where there's just 2 questions on the ballot. Should Newsom be recalled? And the second question among the list below, who should replace him? And the thing about this is you don't have to reach 50%. Whoever gets the most votes from that list, and there were 132 candidates in 2003 in the recall, wins. So someone could win with about 25% of the vote.
So you only need 1.5 million signatures for a recall, but the recall effort is actually working on getting 1.9 million signatures because apparently in California, especially with Newsom, now that he's in charge, they want to really verify the signatures this time on the recall effort, but they don't actually verify the signatures at all when they're ballot harvesting during regular elections in California, oh no, they don't verify those signatures at all because they allow ballot harvesting. So since they allow ballot harvesting, why check the signatures? It's not necessary because it's going to be bad for Republicans. It's going to go very badly for them in regular general elections. But on a recall effort, suddenly signature verification is very important. So the Republican effort to recall Gavin Newsom in California is going to require 1.9 million signatures, just kind of a big cushion to make sure that when Gavin and his people try to verify signatures, they can do everything they can to throw out as many of these signatures and as many of these quote unquote ballots as they can. Boy, what a complete hypocrite without question. And that's Newsom panics at recall and opens the economy. Next up, podcast listeners, we have Kevin Faulconer for governor. So Kevin Faulconer is the former mayor of San Diego, and Charles Payne on Neil Cavuto interviews San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer and asks him a bunch of questions. And we have a series of clips on this because it's really interesting because this guy, Kevin Faulconer, could easily be and potentially be the new governor of California in short order. And so we have the first clip up, and here it is.
All of a sudden, everyone's having the general epiphany, whether it's the governor of New York, the mayor of Chicago. And I'm just going to put it to you bluntly. Some people are now saying that this feels like maybe they deliberately slowed down the economy to influence the election. I mean, you hate to think of things like that, but the timing is just so frustrating for a lot of people, particularly those who've already lost their business and can't get it back, and those who worked at those businesses and can't find jobs.
And so here's former San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer's response to Charles Payne's question. Really important because, as I said, this guy could be the new governor of California. We have that clip, and here it is.
Well, it's incredibly frustrating. And again, back to livelihoods and lives. So many Californians are hurting, and that's been real. And that's why, again, as mayor, I've been so outspoken about that all throughout this process. And again, to be open and closed with no science behind that. You know, the companies, the small businesses that are the backbone of our economy in California, you know, once they shut, they're not coming back. And that's why there's been this real sense of urgency to make a change in California, make a change at the top, because what we're seeing not happening in terms of the rollout of our vaccines, unfortunately, one of the worst in the nation. The fact that our kids aren't back in school, I mean, you start adding all of this up, it's not working in California. And that's why we need new leadership.
So you know who's quiet in California about this recall? Hollywood. Hollywood is quiet. Why? Because Hollywood is shut down. They are shut down. So the same Hollywood woke group who, of course, hated Donald Trump, even though Donald Trump wanted to open up the economy, was telling the states to open up the economy and send kids back to school and so forth. No, that Hollywood crowd, they actually are quiet. They're silent on the issue of the recall, which makes you wonder, gee, I wonder how they're actually going to vote when they go into the voting booth, because now it's actually what? It's affecting their paycheck. It's really affecting their ability to make a living. And so how close is the recall? Well, we have this final clip of this segment, and here it is.
Well, I think the signatures are going to get there. There's 1.1 million been collected out of 1.5 million that are necessary. And that number is growing every single day. And by the way, this is bipartisan. This is Democrats, Republicans, independents, everybody that wants that change at the top in California. So I believe the recall is going to qualify, and I believe that Californians are ready to elect a new governor.
So there's also the whole school issue, right? Because the teachers' unions in California, and many other states, by the way, not just California, but the teachers' unions in California, which are really kind of like a cartel, they're like El Chapo. Not the teachers, by the way, so don't hit me on that. The teachers, the rank and file teachers are terrific, but the teachers' unions, I'm sorry, it's a cartel, and they don't want to go back to work. They don't. And why does that matter in California? Well, because if you're a parent, you have children, you want your kids to go back to school, you want to go back to work yourself, you want to go back to your regular life. And we looked in to get a bunch of data out of California about this issue about suicide of students. And instead, we decided to pull up an article from Las Vegas, and it's reported from the Daily Wire. It says, surge of student suicides forced Las Vegas School District to return to in-person learning. Now, you can imagine how badly this article goes, but it says the nation's 5th largest school district of Clark County, Nevada, will return to in-person education as quickly as possible following a surge of student suicides in and around the county's Central City, Las Vegas, according to the New York Times. The shocking news of a rash of student suicides in Nevada has school districts across the country rethinking the strategy of in-home and online learning amid the ongoing coronavirus pandemic and reconsidering their position that students might fully recover from a year spent out of the company of peers. Well, it's kind of obvious, right? So in California, you have this massive economy, this 40 million people that live there, and I'm not sure how many students there are in K-12 in California, but clearly the teachers' unions have pitted themselves against these students, and they put themselves first instead of putting the students first. The students need to be back in school. So if you're wondering at all why the recall effort may very well succeed and why Kevin Faulconer may very well be the next governor of California, think about not just the students and not just the small businesses, but think about the non-traditional voters, people who normally would never vote for a Republican in California, who may just vote for Kevin Faulconer for governor, like Hollywood, right? Like Hollywood, like anyone whose business has been shut down or whose industry has been affected, and now they're seeing it in their pocketbook and in their wallet. And that is Kevin Faulconer for governor. Next up, podcast listeners, we have George Stephanopoulos says, there are not two sides to a story. You can't believe this series of clips we're going to play for you. It's unbelievable that a journalist would actually say, a story doesn't have two sides. I'm a journalist. A story only has one side. I mean, that's antithetical to journalism. Nonetheless, George Stephanopoulos is interviewing Rand Paul, and it's a terrific, I think, series of clips we're going to play for you, where Rand Paul just smashes in the face George Stephanopoulos with Rand Paul's intellect. And George tries his best on ABC News, good old crooked George Stephanopoulos tries his best to play gotcha with Rand Paul and is incredibly unsuccessful at doing so. So naturally, this interview is about the election and about the impeachment and so forth, and it's quite recent. It's only like a couple of days ago this interview took place. And so here is Stephanopoulos to Rand Paul. We have the first clip, and here it is.
Senator Paul, let me begin with a threshold question for you. This election was not stolen. Do you accept that fact?
Well, what I would say is that the debate over whether or not there was fraud should occur. We never had any presentation in court where we actually looked at the evidence. Most of the cases were thrown out for lack of standing, which is a procedural way of not actually hearing the question. There were several states in which the law was changed by the Secretary of State and not the state legislature. To me, those are clearly unconstitutional, and I think there's still a chance that those actually do finally work their way up to the Supreme Court. Courts traditionally and historically don't like to hear election questions. But yes, were there people who voted twice? Were there dead people who voted? Were there illegal aliens who voted? Yes, and we should get to the bottom of it. I'll give you an example. In my state, when we had a Democrat Secretary of State, she refused, even under federal order, to purge the rolls of illegal voters. We got a Republican Secretary of State, and he purged the rolls.
Senator Paul.
So that's right. So a state legislature makes the election laws. And the Secretary of State implements those laws as they were written by the state legislature. That's not what happened last election in some swing states, where the Secretary of State's wholesale changed the election laws, which they cannot do. And that was Rand Paul's part. That was Rand Paul's point, Nonetheless, listen to Stephanopoulos toe the party line as an alleged media person to Rand Paul. He says, well, they were dismissed for just a lack of evidence, but not for standing. Here's this clip. You just got to listen to this series of clips. It's unbelievable. Here it is.
No election is perfect, but there were 86 challenges filed by President Trump and his allies in court. All were dismissed. Every state certified the results after investigations, counts, and recounts. The Department of Justice, led by William Barr, said there's no widespread evidence of fraud. Can't you just say the words, this election was not stolen?
What I would suggest is, what I would suggest is that if we want greater confidence in our elections, and 75% of Republicans agree with me, is that we do need to look at election integrity, and we do need to see if we can restore confidence in the elections.
Yes. So there's a further response from Rand Paul to that question. Listen to this epic response. We have that clip, and here it is.
Well, 75% of Republicans agree with you because they were fed a big lie by President Trump and his supporters who say the election was stolen. Why can't you say,
well, I think where
President Biden won a legitimate and fair election?
Hey, George, where you make a mistake is that people coming from the liberal side like you immediately say everything's a lie instead of saying there are two sides to everything. Historically, what would happen is if I said that I thought there was fraud, you would interview someone else who said there wasn't. But now you insert yourself in the middle and say the absolute fact is that everything I'm saying is a lie.
Well, because, Senator, I said what the president said was a lie because he said, hold on a second. He said the election was stolen. This election was not stolen. The results were certified in every single state after counts and recounts.
You're saying that absolutely you're saying there was no fraud and it's all been investigated. That's just not true.
So it's not what I said, sir. I said the Department of Justice found no evidence. Let me finish my point.
You said
something that was not true.
You say we're all liars. You're just simply saying we're all liars. And
I said it was a lie that the election was stolen.
Premise that you're right and we're wrong.
So, is that awesome or what? That is awesome. And so, of course, Rand Paul's central point is that here I am arguing with you, George Stephanopoulos, and you're telling me what the way things are, but you're not having any kind of balance here with a Democrat and a Republican or any kind of information. You're just arguing the Democrat talking points. It's so obvious. So this epic argument continues. Okay, it continues. Listen to this clip. Here it is.
Well, let's talk about the specifics of it. In Wisconsin, tens of thousands of absentee votes had only the name on them and no address. Historically, those were thrown out. This time they weren't. They made special accommodations because they said, oh, it's a pandemic and people forgot what their address was. So they changed the law after the fact. That is wrong. That's unconstitutional. And I plan on spending the next 2 years going around state to state and fixing these problems. And I won't be cowed by liberals in the media who say, there's no evidence here and you're a liar if you talk about election fraud. No, let's have an open debate. It's a free country.
So is that great or what? So there is an example where Rand Paul just gave to George Stephanopoulos. It was like, look, in Wisconsin, the law was changed essentially by the Secretary of State and or was not enforced, whereby it said, hey, look, we're going to mail out, these thousands and thousands of ballots. And instead of you just putting your name on the ballot and as well as your address, which is a requirement, and then signing it, they had all these ballots, many, many thousands of them that just had a name but no address. Now that, of course, is incredibly sketchy, right? Why would anyone fill out a ballot in Wisconsin and not put their address? Okay, so that automatically, notwithstanding the fact that they changed the rules last minute and would normally not count those ballots, but then decided to count them, and that could have in Wisconsin made a significant difference. And so that's Rand Paul's point. And then he goes on, of course, in that particular clip and says, the problem is that we have a left-wing media that's not even interested in learning or curious in engaging in journalism to find out what is going on. And so this is where this goes really south for George Stephanopoulos. He literally said, as we have called this segment, there are not two sides to a story. Can you imagine a journalist saying that? We have that clip, and here it is.
There's no widespread evidence of election fraud that overturned the results. That was stated as well by the Department of Justice, led by President Trump's Attorney General. In Wisconsin, there were counts and recounts.
Never studied that. Even that's
certified.
Not true. Even that's not true. Even
William
that's
Barr
not
said
true.
that directly.
Barr said that, but there was. Yes, he said that, yes. That was a pronouncement. There has been no thorough examination of all the states to see what problems we had and see if they could fix them. Now, let me say, to be clear, I voted to certify the state electors because I think it would be wrong for Congress to overturn that. But at the same time, I'm not willing just to sit here and say, oh, everybody on the Republican side is a liar and there is no fraud. No, there were lots of problems, and there were secretaries of state who illegally changed the law, and that needs to be fixed. fixed, and I'm going to work hard to fix it, and I won't be cowed by people saying, oh, you're a liar. That's the problem with the media today, is they say all Republicans are liars and everything we say is a lie. There are two sides to every story. Interview somebody on the other side, but don't insert yourself into the story to say we're all liars because we think there's some fraud in the election.
There are not two sides to the story.
Podcast listeners, did you just hear that? George Stephanopoulos of one of America's largest news desks and allegedly a reporter on hard news, says there are not two sides to a story. That is antithetical to journalism. The whole point of journalism is to listen to and report both sides of a story and let the public decide what they believe. That's how you get to the truth. You can't seek the truth if you say, as a journalist, there are not two sides to a story. I have never heard in my entire life a journalist, a hard news person, such as George Stephanopoulos, being that stupid to admit that he believes there aren't two sides to a story. There's only his side. So we have the final clip in this series, and here's Rand Paul hitting back. And here it is.
George, you're forgetting who you are. You're forgetting who you are as a journalist. If you think there's only one side, you're inserting yourself into the story to say, I'm a liar because I want to look at election fraud and I want to look at secretaries of state who illegally changed the voter laws without the permission of their state legislatures. That is incontrovertible. It happened. And you can't just sweep that under the rug and say, oh, nothing to see here, and everybody's a liar and you're a fool if you bring this up. You're inserting yourself into the story. A journalist would hear both sides, and there are two sides to this story.
I'm standing by facts. There are not two sides to facts.
So ABC, George Stephanopoulos, is standing by the facts rather than saying that there are two sides to a story. So now apparently in America, the news media stands by the facts, but the Republicans, of course, don't have the facts. And the media is not interested in seeking the truth because they already have the facts. So instead, since the media already has the facts, they're not interested in investigative journalism. Their job instead is to bring Republicans on and try to play gotcha and then say, well, we have the facts, okay? Don't tell us what the facts are. We already have them. So what you said is all a lie, and what you said is completely wrong, and we're going to cancel you because only we, ABC News, George Stephanopoulos, has the facts. That's a sad day for America when you say, there are not two sides to a story. And that's George Stephanopoulos says, there are not two sides to a story. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Mitt Romney is going to vote to convict again. I have no doubt. Okay, to be fair, Mitt Romney didn't actually say for sure that he was going to vote to convict Trump again in the Senate. Because, by the way, he was the only one that voted last time to convict Trump. By the way, the only Republican to vote to convict Trump last time. But I'm sure he's going to do it again. Let's face it. So here's Chris Wallace asking Mitt Romney, haven't you already decided to convict? We had that clip, and here it is.
You were the only Senate Republican to vote to convict and remove the president the first time. Of course, now as a juror again, I'm sure you want to hear the evidence. But I want to put up what you said on January 6th, the day that the mob attacked the U.S. Capitol. Here's what you said. We gathered today due to a selfish man's injured pride. What happened here today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. Senator, it sure sounds like you're going to vote to convict.
Well, there's no question but that the article of impeachment that was sent over by the House suggests impeachable conduct, but we have not yet heard either from the prosecution or from the defense. I'll get a chance to hear from them, and I will do my best as a Senate juror to apply justice as well as I can understand it.
So, as Romney said in the quote that good old Chris Wallace read, Romney said, well, the reason why we had this happen in Washington, D.C. with respect to the quote-unquote insurrection is because the President of the United States, his pride was hurt. Talk about someone's pride being hurt. It's Mitt Romney. He could have very well have written that about himself because since day one, since Trump has been there, Romney is incredibly jealous, incredibly envious of Donald Trump, the fact that he was president and Romney wasn't. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So Romney, of course, as I said, was the only Republican the first time to convict Trump. There's no doubt he's going to vote again if it really gets that far. So Chris Wallace asks Romney, what about Biden's call for unity? We have that clip, and here it is.
In his inaugural address on Wednesday, President Biden made a call for unity. Here is some of that.
We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal.
Now, some of your Republican colleagues, including Marco Rubio, who's going to be on in the next segment, say that President Biden has already breached that call for unity with some of his actions, executive actions, legislative agenda in the opening days. Do you see an inherent conflict between calling for unity and a new president pursuing his agenda?
Yeah, well, that's finally a reasonably good question from Chris Wallace. Does Biden really want unity after he signed all those executive orders day one? And the fact that there is an impeachment process that could be potentially a trial that could be going on in the United States Senate? We have Romney's response to that question, and here it is.
Well, I think it would be unrealistic to assume that that Democrats and Republicans are going to see eye to eye on every issue. There are going to be differences of opinion. That's expected. But at the same time, I think it's appropriate for us to have unity of purpose, unity of heart, a recognition that we respect each other and treat each other with comity. And that is something which I believe President Biden wants to see. At the same time, I think there are some actions the president is taking that are going to lead to some anger and division. I think, for instance, saying we're not going to allow further leases on government land for oil and gas. That obviously very badly hurts some of our rural communities. Stopping the Keystone Pipeline, that puts a lot of people out of work. Those people are going to be understandably angry. So I think you've got to be pretty careful, even recognizing the bounds of disagreement, to not do things that incite a great deal of unnecessary anger.
So Romney is concerned about the fact that Biden, if he isn't going to be unifying, might do things that might incite anger. Well, that could also incite violence, right? Now, to be fair, Romney calls it anger, but let's face it, people can get angry enough to potentially, turn against their government. I'm not suggesting that that is the right thing to do, because I'm not, okay? So what I am saying is this: Romney literally contradicts himself in this entire segment where Mitt Romney is going to vote to convict again. And how does he do it? How does he do it? Well, he says on the one hand that, he wants comity, he wants people to work together, he wants Biden to be unifying. And at the same time, he's saying, well, Biden wants to cancel all of the gas companies. Biden, let's face it, he wants to get rid of fossil fuels. We know that because Biden really isn't in charge. We know who's in charge. It's Barack Obama and his people. We know that for sure. So one of the first things that Joe Biden or Barack Obama did in Barack Obama's third term with Biden is to basically cancel the natural gas exploration as well as the Keystone Pipeline. And what does that do? That puts hundreds of people out of work, probably actually thousands of people out of work directly and indirectly to that particular industry. Why wouldn't they be angry? Why wouldn't that potentially incite anger and maybe incite potential violence at a government that keeps changing the rules of the game? A government that is literally attacking the working men and women of our country. So why am I saying this? Well, because, Romney's saying on the one hand, he wants to convict Donald Trump and in the Senate, for inciting violence. But on the other hand, he doesn't seem to understand the fact that Joe Biden is potentially, with his executive orders, causing issues with the working men of this country who are fed up with the lockdowns and fed up with government interrupting their lives, including shutting down their livelihoods. There's no question about that. There's no question. So it's a complete shell game that Mitt Romney always plays. Well, I want everybody to be peaceful. Donald Trump incited violence. Yeah, but I think it's good that Joe Biden wants to call for unity. On the other hand, he shouldn't do these things because it could make people angry. Well, doesn't he understand why people were angry in the first place? From the first place when Donald Trump lost? And he doesn't. he completely misses the point because this guy, Mitt Romney, was reared on, without question, a very wealthy beginning and has never really, in my opinion, had to be out there in the working world. So Chris Wallace asked, well, what about that airport incident? So this is the final clip in this segment. So as you probably have seen, or maybe you haven't, Mitt Romney was in the airport in Utah on his way back to Washington, D.C., and he was approached by people who had just had it with him because of his anti-Trump stance. And nonetheless, Wallace asks him the question about how this group of people came to Mitt Romney in the airport and essentially said, look, we're going to primary you and you will not be coming back to the United States Senate when the time comes during your next election. And so Wallace asks him the question, what do you think about that? And Romney just shrugs it off. We have that clip and here it is.
Senator, you were flying from Utah to D.C. on January 5th, the day before the attack on the Capitol, when some people who don't particularly like your stand, particularly when it comes to Donald Trump, went after you. Here's an example of that.
When Trump gets reelected, you're getting primaried. Laugh it up. Yeah, well, I think you. Laugh it up.
Where is the GOP now, Senator? What is the balance between the traditional Republicans and the Trump Republicans? And what do you think is the key to where your party goes over the next few years?
Well, first, I'd note that there are going to be new faces that are going to be the spokespeople for our party and their own vision. And that could be Larry Hogan. It could be Charlie Baker. It could be Marco Rubio, who's going to be on in the moment, or Ben Sass. So there'll be some new faces. President Trump, of course, will continue to have influence.
So that's kind of interesting, right? Because what the question really came down to is, well, what happened about that airport? What about that airport incident? And then Romney doubles down and says, well, let me give you a list of people that I think are going to be the inheritors of the Republican Party. And they're all rhinos. They're all people that really aren't interested in anything other than gaining power and maintaining the status quo. They aren't interested in really changing things. And I can tell you this personally, because one of the people that he talked about was the governor of my state, which is Larry Hogan, who really thinks he's going to be president of the United States and doesn't have a chance. And he doesn't have a chance because he's done nothing more than manage the decline of the state of Maryland. And so that's what he's going to run on. Oh, I can get along with anybody, and I just want to be the status quo guy. Meanwhile, he has literally overseen a state that has seen the city of Baltimore devolve into what really is a third world country. That's what it looks like. And it looks that way, to be clear, because of the crime, because of the level of crime, because of the fact that 83% of the schools are failed schools, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, Mitt Romney hasn't learned because he was approached in the airport and he was talked to in the airport about, hey, look, we're going to primary you. He's doubling down. He wants the rhinos back in control because they get along with the Democrats the best, and they'll be able to, pass policies that once again shaft the working men and women. And that's okay, because when you're rich like Mitt Romney, it's not going to affect you. It's just going to affect, everybody else who supports your lifestyle in Washington. And that is Mitt Romney to convict again. So we have a great segment here. It's Millennials Embrace Prenups. So this great segment is Millennials Embrace Prenups, but through a very different lens. So what does that mean? So in the Wall Street Journal, just a few days ago, there is an article, and it's entitled Millennials Embrace Prenups, but through a very different lens than in the past. And here's what it says. I have to read this because this is Mark and the Millennials, and it's very fun. It says, millennials are often known to buck convention. No doubt. That seems to be true even when it comes to prenuptial agreements. In the past, prenups were most common among young adults from wealthy families or couples entering second or third marriages. Today, younger adults of all income levels are drafting them, not only to protect assets accumulated before and during marriage, but to address societal realities that weren't necessarily present or common years ago, such as a desire to keep finances separate, student debt, social media use, embryo ownership, and even pet care. Experts point to the fact that many millennials are children of divorced parents and have had an intimate look at what can happen financially when a marriage dissolves. At the same time, the stigma or taboo that used to be associated with discussing money before marriage is slowly disappearing. You're effectively negotiating your divorce agreement in advance in a way that's more egalitarian than before, says Jacqueline Horinian, a partner with a law firm of Weiselman, Horinian and Associates in Great Neck, New York. So one of the areas is financial separation. Some millennial couples who want to maintain a clear separation of their finances during marriage are using prenups as a workaround for state laws that would otherwise treat certain assets as marital property. They don't want to commingle their money. They want to live like, financial roommates, says Stephen M. Resnick, a family law attorney with Ziegler, Resnick, and Epstein in Livingston, New York, who practices in New York and Jersey. This mindset change is even true for clients who don't have significant assets to protect going into marriage, lawyers say. Some millennials want to keep their finances, current and future, separate and businesslike, which would allow them to leave a marriage, if necessary, without many strings attached. Of course, marriage often requires the need to joint purchases, such as a family home or a car, and certain shared expenses, such as a child's bar or bat mitzvah, college education, or a wedding. While a prenup cannot address child support, couples who want to keep their finances separate can use prenups to lay out how they will pay for some of these big-ticket items. Says Nicole Sodoma, founder and managing principal of Sodoma Law in Charlotte, North Carolina. It sure sounds to me, and the article goes on quite a bit, so sure it sounds to me like this article, millennials embrace prenups, but through a very different lens than in the past. Sounds to me like what they're saying is, you're really not married. Because how many of you out there in podcast land have friends, because I do, in fact, I have family members who actually keep their finances, the dad and mom, prior to getting married, of course, naturally had separate finances, and then they get married, and they still keep their finances completely and utterly separate, in separate checking accounts, only in their own names, no joint account, basically. Or if there is a joint account, it's, there's hardly any money in it. And how would that work? How does that work? Because you have children, and what happens to the children? Hey, Dad, can I have some money to, go to the store up the street because I want to buy some candy and I want to buy some soda. And then, the dad goes, okay, but here's how it's going to work. I'm going to give you $10 and you need to get $10 from your mom too, because we keep our finances separate. I mean, that really warms the heart, doesn't it? I mean, it's so cold. It's so cold. How could anyone reasonably think, and maybe this is just a baby boomer talking, and I got Chris over here laughing like crazy. How could anyone think who is a millennial, and I know this already exists, by the way, with baby boomers too, to be fair, because I know them. How would anyone think that this would actually work and or be sustainable? It's not sustainable. Of course it's not sustainable. Why is it not sustainable? Because at some point, there's going to be one partner or the other in the marriage who makes more money, and probably a lot more money at some point. And then there's going to be, of course, some jealousy. So how does that work? So let's just say, for example, it's the mom. Okay, let's take the contrarian position. Let's say the mom is a lawyer. She becomes a partner in a major law firm. And she's now making $350,000 a year because she's a high-powered lawyer. And the dad is, let's say, an electrician, but it's making $100,000 a year. I know that's a lot of money, obviously, in both cases. So the mom decides she's going to buy a Rolls Royce, and the dad buys the minivan because, the mom goes, hey, since you make less money, I want you to drive the kids around in that minivan. And then you start having this resentment. It's like, well, wait a minute. You're driving the Rolls Royce, and you're never allowing me to use your Rolls Royce, and you never apparently also want to use my van. How is that going to work, right? It's just me, but I just think that when you do indeed commingle your stuff and your money, it shows that you are indeed committed to your marriage. And when you don't commingle it, it shows that, if this doesn't work out, it's going to be a really easy exit for me because I can just file the papers and just get out of this thing really fast. And what's yours is yours. And what's mine is mine, except, of course, when there are kids involved. And that always complicates things, which is the whole point of why I think finances should not be separate. But nonetheless, that's millennials embrace prenups, but through a very different lens. It's a unique time, and millennials are going to inherit the earth because they are the largest generation after the baby boomers. And as the baby boomers die off, they are the largest generation. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Dem and Republican governors to purge Trump Republicans. That is correct. So apparently, both the Democrat Governors Association sent out a survey. So if you're a governor, you are part of the Democrat Governors Association. They sent out a survey. And the survey was to their people, to their voters, hey, look, do you support, like purging Trump supporters and, like not making sure they don't get jobs, making sure they don't actually get appointments at any time in the future? And of course, that survey went out. And you would think, okay, well, you would almost expect that in 2021 from the Democrat Party, just because, they want to cancel everybody. And that's just how they roll. But what you wouldn't expect, what you would not expect, is that would also be happening in the Republican Party. So I think that's fascinating, right? Why do I think that's fascinating? Because why would a sitting Republican governor or United States senator or anyone for that matter who's already in elective office really care to try to remove people from their party just because they disagree on some issues or some policy issues? And it just shows you that the real narrow-minded people are the ones who want to purge people from their party. Because a smart person who really wants to build a political party obviously wants a big tent party. That's how you gain coalitions, and that's how you win elections. You don't make the coalitions smaller. It's not how you win. So Chris Wallace asked Mitt Romney, where does the Republican Party go from here? Well, there's no better anti-Republican Party person or anti-conservative person or anti-Trump person than Mitt Romney. And Mitt Romney talks about who he thinks is going to inherit the Republican Party, other than, of course, Mitt Romney himself. But we have that clip, and here it is.
Where is the GOP now, Senator? What is the balance between the traditional Republicans and the Trump Republicans? And what do you think is the key to where your party goes over the next few years?
Well, first, I'd note that there are going to be new faces that are going to be the spokespeople for our party and their own vision. And that could be Larry Hogan. It could be Charlie Baker. It could be Marco Rubio, who's going to be on in the moment, or Ben Sass. So there'll be some new faces. President Trump, of course, will continue to have influence.
So apparently, according to Mitt Romney, other than Mitt Romney inheriting the Republican Party post-Trump, what Romney wants to see is, people like Larry Hogan. So let's talk about Larry Hogan just a little bit, because this is someone that I know. So in the Baltimore Sun, just to prove my point about how not just the Democrat governors, but actually a Republican governor wants to purge anyone that doesn't think the way they think and, who's a Trump supporter. They want to purge the Trump supporters out of the party. Just to prove my point, here's a Baltimore Sun article entitled, Larry Hogan, the GOP's anti-Trump, hopes to reverse the party's direction and purge its extremists. A day after rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol, Maryland Governor Hogan, who's a Republican, called for Donald Trump to resign from the presidency or be ousted. Hogan favors a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, which means illegal immigrants, and thinks Republicans should focus less on opposing abortion. What? He wants to purge the party of radical extremists. So let's stop here. So according to Larry Hogan, you are a radical extremist if you are pro-life. You are a radical extremist if you support Donald Trump, and you are a radical extremist if you in any way, shape, or form think that some of the policies, okay, let's focus on policies, of Donald Trump were correct. The article continues, that doesn't sound like someone with much future in the national GOP. Given that a Washington Post poll 2 weeks ago found a solid majority of the party wants to continue to follow Trump's leadership. But Hogan believes that the recent erosion of Trump's approval ratings in the GOP from 85% in October to 79% this month suggests that Hogan's stances are gaining support among Republicans appalled at Trump's recent behavior, especially his role in inciting the January 6th assault. Hogan hopes the trend will continue and reshape the party, opening the door for him to compete for the GOP presidential nomination in 2024. Quote, a lot more people are jumping off the sinking ship and trying to get into the life raft where I've been all along, said Larry Hogan, a Trump critic since before the 2016 election. He spoke to me last week in a wide-ranging interview in which he described his vision for the GOP going forward and his role in it. This is according to the person who's writing the article. It wasn't Donald Trump that spoke, of course, to Larry Hogan. Quote, there's going to be a fight for the soul of the Republican Party, Hogan said. There are an awful lot of people in one lane fighting to take on the mantle of Donald Trump. I would argue that I'm one of the leading voices on the other side to say that we've got to move in a completely different direction. So for you people out there who are political junkies and you listen to politics, when a politician says, hey, we're going in a different direction, that is like the classic line that a politician uses without actually explaining what that direction is. Hey, it's time to go in a different direction. It's like a great platitude to use in campaigns, which Hogan is famous for. And Hogan is also famous for polling, right? He's polling saying, well, Trump's support was 85, now it's 79, so therefore the polling is going down, 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 down. And therefore, Hogan is jumping ship as well. And to be fair, Hogan is not, he's been anti-Trump since day one. But nonetheless, that is Governor Larry Hogan, who's a Republican, who wants to purge Trump supporters from the party. I got to tell you something. That's 74 million voters nationwide. And if Larry Hogan wants to be president of the United States and he wants to purge 74 million voters nationwide, it's time for Larry Hogan to change parties and become a Democrat, which he is. Because the only thing he has done in Maryland is to manage the decline of the state. He has done nothing to truly bring on, I don't know, like private school vouchers. Now he's going to say, "Oh yeah, I've done a little bit of that." He really hasn't. And I just want to add to this. Look, in Baltimore City, I'm just going to go a little local for a minute. In Baltimore City, 83% of the schools are failed schools by any measure whatsoever. Yet they are the third highest funded in the United States, the third highest funded in the U.S. And the schools have been closed now almost for a year. And you think Hogan could sign an executive order to say, you know what, we're going to use all of that money, the third highest per pupil spending in the United States, we're going to move that money away from the public school system and empower the parents via executive order so that they can choose the private school, charter school, or public school of their choice. And you know what they're going to choose every single time, those parents? They're going to choose the better school, and they're going to choose the school that's actually open. They're not going to choose the school that's closed because they want what's best for their children. The governor hasn't done that. So he has managed the decline of the state. And instead of embracing a lot of the great policies, of the former president, I'm not saying all of the policies, a lot of the really good policies, like school choice, he hasn't. Instead, he wants to purge 74 million Republicans from the Republican Party, which means he's a de facto Democrat, And therefore, he should just change his party affiliation. And that's Dem and Republican governors to purge Trump Republicans. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Want to give a special thanks to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Hopefully, when Parler opens again, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.